Ian,
Joël.
do you think Nigel Farage is now realizing that like fiat money is basically an IOU?
I think so.
What the troll?
Farage, that would be an intro. Mind you, YouTube will probably take us down now because we saw it in the first 2 minutes. But
His first few
yeah,
seconds.
he was crying like a bit of a baby, really, about I've been cancelled by the banks, and he made a big old statement on GB News about how his long history of the banks since the 80s has now come to an end because they, without notice and without warning. Well, I think there was a little bit of warning, wasn't there? They did kind of give him the heads up that they were shutting his bank account, but as he says, there was no explanation for it, and they just shut him out and locked him out of his personal and business account, I think. And obviously, he's been kicking up a stink about that. And since then, apparently, he's been applying for like 8 or 9 other banks, and they've also rejected him.
Yeah, which if you have any idea how like AML and all of these KYC things work, which we get into later on, that's logical. So firstly, any bank can reject you under any circumstances. I had that with National West, for example. I applied. They said, sorry, we can't give you an account because you've not been in the UK long enough at that point.
Yeah.
So, okay, fine. I guess I have to search for another bank. I didn't go on Twitter and cry about it like a baby. And secondly, like a bank doesn't have to give you a reason to reject you. They, I can't remember if it was in '08 or in the beginning of '09, but in the same week, every bank, at least in Europe, added that clause to their terms of service that they can basically, under suspicion, if like certain AML flags come up, seize your assets, freeze your accounts, and in like the worst case, basically hand that money over to like, I don't know, police or just some investigation team who's looking into these things. So I kind of looked at the thing, I kind of went like, well, this has been widely available ever since, and like, why are we upset with this now? But I guess it's clickbaity, and people will see what you have to say.
And if anyone loves a clickbait, it's Nigel Farage. I mean, he loves a little bit of whining and moaning on socials. That's his whole thing, isn't it? And like any bank has got the right to reject an application or say no to any application that you make to open up a bank account. What was funny was when he was doing the announcement, the banner on the bottom of the report said Farage cancelled by banks. And I thought that was quite loaded, to be honest. Like, this whole cancel culture thing is, he's got a way of politicizing words just subtly enough for people to sort of like be captured by it, and that's what he's very good at. So I do wonder how much information he has been given by the banks about as to why it is exactly that they've closed his bank accounts. And if there is a reason, I'm sure somewhere down the line it might come out in the wash.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, not like protecting him, but what is really obnoxious is if that happens to you for whatever reason, it's actually quite a long process to get access to your funds again. So let's just say there's a very silly example with a guy in Switzerland a few years ago where he was on a business trip in, I can't remember if it was Russia or the Ukraine back in 2014, but like he was in either one of the two countries. And back then, when like the first wave of that war started, they were sort of flagging people coming in and out of these countries. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, he was in both and then returned. And so they froze his assets because he feared he was like a Russian or Ukrainian spy or whatever. But he had legitimate business reasons for being in both countries. And I think it took him almost 7 or 8 months to get his money back, essentially. Luckily, it was like only one of the business accounts. But to be fair, like if that happens to you, that's a shitty thing. But that's not really down to like the people working at the bank. That's just the way global AML rules work. Like if you've ever tried and sent more than, I think it's 5 grand or even 10 grand overseas somewhere in the world, like your money is stuck for whatever reasons. There's this thing called Bitcoin that fixes this, but so to be fair, like if he gets access to his money, which I think he will, it is quite a process of getting there. So that's the one thing I kind of agree with him. Like yeah, that is shitty, but like that's not down to the banks again. That's just AML rules and all of the crap that is KYC and all of these things.
Yeah, and I don't want to endorse Farage in any way, because he and I think, are at different ends of the spectrum politically. But it does open up a whole dialogue in a way that, you know, he's got a couple of million followers on socials anyway, so he, you know, he's got a big voice out there, whether it's, you know, a voice you agree with or otherwise. But it certainly got the attention of everyone on that tweet that he put out when he made that announcement. Oh, by the way, AML is anti-money laundering laws, if anyone was wondering what AML is. And what struck me was there was a lot of Bitcoiners in there saying, oh, Bitcoin fixes this. And quite rightly so, Bitcoin does fix this. You don't need an application to buy Bitcoin. You know, you just go on and buy it and it's yours, considering the fact that you have to self-custody it. But I suppose we can have a chat, Joël, about this and see what you think. The comments were from Bitcoiners. It was less signal, but more fucking like chatting shit and being a little bit kind of trashy with their comments. I'm trying to be nice here. And I think if you're going on there and looking at the comments and the threads and you're sort of seeing the signal amongst the noise that, you know, there's this thing called Bitcoin that fixes this, but then you see some of the dialogue that was going on in there, it's kind of off-putting. And I know we chatted about this a little bit when we spoke to Jordan, and when I was saying about the noise amongst the signal and how a lot of people in the Twitter sphere tend to just sort of like spout their political bigotry, and that does some harm, I think, for the space, because Bitcoin is, you know, apolitical, and I suppose in a way, just by being apolitical, it's therefore by default political in some way, because it's like, you know, you can't avoid being political. But it kind of got me thinking, like, because a lot of people in there who didn't understand Bitcoin, like the pre-coiners and things like that, were saying, you know, the usual comments that you see about Bitcoin: oh, it's too late and it's too expensive, it's for criminals. All the FUD was all in these little comments, and I think it was an opportunity, if anything, for Bitcoiners to really come in and sort of try to educate those people that were saying those things, rather than just sort of like throwing, you know, shitty comments towards them. Particularly when people were sort of trash talking Bitcoin, there was an opportunity there for us to really show up in a way that, you know, there's an opportunity, is what I'm trying to say, for us to sort of like promote Bitcoin, because we don't have a marketing department, and it's a shame that people go on there and start acting this way on socials. But
yeah,
what do you think?
Honestly, sometimes I think, like, I wish it would happen to a lefty, and like, not to like throw lefties under a bus, but like, it's obviously good on the one end if this happens, that we can sort of point fingers and go, see, banks can fucking close your bank accounts if they want to. Whether like he met this threshold or whether he had enough money in the bank, because there's a whole thing going on with like a BBC journalist now. But then at the same time, I go like, it didn't help that we had like all of the American Bitcoiners who, to be fair, you know, probably don't know who Nigel Farage is. Like, I think if they're somehow politically involved, they might have heard of him with, like, you know, the Trump camp and all these things. But like, generally speaking, people don't know who he is. I think not even people in Central Europe know who he is exactly. They just seen him in Brussels a few times. And they kind of go like, oh, this is unfair because like this shouldn't happen. So they don't invest any time into researching what happened. They then post Bitcoin fixes this, which again, yes, but it sort of, it sheds a light on a lot of the narratives that we see pushed. Having said that, though, I listened to a very good podcast today by the Progressive Bitcoiner. It's like the, it's not the book by Jason, but it's Trey Walsh, I think is his name. He does the Progressive Bitcoiner podcast, essentially. And he had a guy on for the new season now who talked about health and these things. And he had a very good quote in there where he went, you know, if people from the left especially, because they address that issue as well, are interested in fixing a more fairer economic system, that people have access to any sort of money, bank account, whatever, they look beyond these events. So I kind of look at this whole Farage thing where I go like, yes, he's got a point, but it obviously makes life a bit harder because technically speaking, you would have to agree that yes, it's unfair that this happened under whatever circumstance. But then again, you're sort of in that mix in there where normies look at these things and go like, what are responding below Nigel Farage? Which, I have the same stand with like people like Trump. These people are entertaining, so this is why you sort of go in there. You like try to rub your elbows in because it's fun. I also do the same thing if like Keir Starmer would have his bank account shut down. So you do this on both ends of the spectrum, but I think it would help us more, at least in the Western world, if this happened to a lefty.
I agree.
Yeah, or just lefties may be a bad word. A more liberal-minded person, let's call it this way, who is maybe not so quick to say, "Oh, I'm the victim," because don't you find it funny that, like, especially Farage, who's usually victim blaming, is sort of now portraying himself as the victim? So that's sort of an ironic thing in itself as well. But I kind of look at it. I go like, it's good to show that it happened. And the only positive I would take away is like ignore what people are posting below, but use this example to go like, hey, he's obviously a nutter, but imagine if this happened to you tomorrow under whatever circumstances, especially if you think about things like CBDCs. So you can kind of use it, but yeah, I would agree with you that it didn't help that like every Bitcoiner literally posted underneath it. But I think, again, 80% probably didn't even know who he was or who he is.
Yeah, I know you just said ignore the comments as well, but I just had a quick brief look, and I can see that Danny Scott from CoinCon, he was wading in quite heavily in this thread. He was really trying hard to sort of be neutral and just sort of saying, effectively Bitcoin fixes this and stuff, and people were just saying Ponzi. Another person was saying, I own a magic beans company and I don't expect to a bank account or mortgage either. Do you want to buy some magic beans? Being all sarcastic and stuff like that. And people are dicks on the internet, I've got to say. And that's just the way of social media, I suppose. But it's, do you know what was
quite funny actually?
Go on.
I under the BBC reporter's thread, there were a couple of people who, like, without judging people, but you can sort of look at people's profile pictures and whatever they put on social and kind of know which party they're voting for. It's not hard to figure out, right? And he was like, "Oh, the banks did us such a favor. Like, let's support big money." And I kind of looked at this. I went like, "Aren't you a lefty? Like, shouldn't you be against the fucking bastards instead of supporting them?" So you get into these funny things. But like, you got a good point, because I think Danny has been trying to get UK bank accounts for Coin Corner for, what did he post, for 10 years straight or something like this?
Something like that.
Jeez. That is a real issue.
Yeah, that's the real issue here.
Just pointing it out.
Nigel, what I'm kind of disappointed about as well in all this is that Nigel Farage was at the Bitcoin Amsterdam. And there was a lot of sort of there was mixed feelings about all that at the time. And, he was on stage, and I think he had paid to be there. I think, he wasn't invited there. Apparently he paid to be on that stage just to give like some sort of dialogue about Bitcoin, which seemed to me that when he was speaking, he kind of understood the principles of it. And what I'm a little bit disappointed about is that he's made this announcement, but has not in any way even acknowledged Bitcoin in any way. So why was he even there at the Bitcoin conference interviewing the likes of fucking Layla Hepburn and
the Bitcoin expert?
Mate, that would be a good episode to talk about her. Bloody hell. But anyway, why hasn't he mentioned Bitcoin in any way? Especially when you see the likes of Michael Saylor commenting on his little tweet that he put out as well. I don't understand that. Where's the mention of that?
I keep going back also. Actually, we can expand this also to the Robert Kennedy announcement and all of these politicians who sort of put Bitcoin at the forefront for their presidential tickets. These are all opportunists.
Yeah, opportunists. Yeah.
They know that if we say these kind of things and maybe we accept lightning donations or whatever, that people will vote for us. Great. And I think that's what I'm a bit disappointed about. And funnily enough, I actually written a personal blog post about this today. We are so dense in our echo chamber that we sometimes forget there's literally other perspectives out there. Or for a community that praises itself to their, don't trust, verify, we very quickly move into these given narratives, stories, whatever. So that's sort of where I look at it, and I kind of go like, not again. Yeah, and to take positives out, I guess use this to show people like, hey, yes, the nutter has his bank account closed, but if you look at money as something neutral, we shouldn't judge by whoever gets access to their money, essentially. Like, if they want to use it, they can use it. Bitcoin is literally there to do this. It doesn't care whether from which side of the spectrum you're coming from. But I would say that's where it stops. And I guess GB News and probably more conservative papers will, actually having said that, every newspaper, also liberal newspapers, will probably drag this story out more because, it's an injustice on one end and sort of a, haha, we got you on the other end. So they keep bringing the story up to just get clicks and probably sell a few more ads packages. But I wouldn't say that it's something drastical that we need to address it now as a community. Like, when WikiLeaks was shut down by Payball in 2011, that was much more influential, I think, when they then decided to go to Bitcoin. So that was more significant. This is just another opportunist who tries to use his fame or his reach now to get something out of it.
Yeah,
what do you think?
I 100% agree with you on that. And you're right in the sense that Farage, he's been forever an opportunist for his own self-gain and self-interest. And, sometimes I do wonder whether he just says the things he thinks people want to hear just for the votes or just for the clicks and just for the money. And the same for the Robert Kennedy Jr. speech over in Miami and the other couple of candidates that were there as well. All they want is your donations, really. And if you look or listen very carefully to what it is they were actually saying on stage, they weren't actually saying, I guarantee you this, Bitcoin standard or anything like that. They were sort of being quite clever with their narratives about how they were talking about Bitcoin, and they weren't making any solid promises about what they would do if they were in office. And true, like to any politician, how many of them have actually really kept their promises and met their sort of targets and all that sort of stuff? And all they're trying to do, what I suppose gives me hope, and it's a little bit bullish in my mind, is that the fact that now Bitcoin is part of their campaign in the sense that the signal is getting out there, and more people that they feel it's necessary to go to the conferences like this and have a pitch, because there's quite a big influence in the Bitcoin ecosystem at the moment. So I think they can see the power behind Bitcoin and the growth behind Bitcoin, and I do question their authenticity and their approach. And it disappoints me when I sort of see some of the big influencers over in America, going on Robert Kennedy Jr.'s yacht and getting selfies and stuff like that. And these are the very people that only months prior were talking about the old, out of touch politicians and don't trust what politicians say. And then as soon as you get some politician sort of mentioning Bitcoin in a positive light, they're all over socials with them and stuff like that. And it kind of makes me a little bit kind of like, well, what are you in it for? For your own self-gain as well and power. So you got to, slay your heroes. You got to don't trust, verify. And I think a lot of people do forget that is, verify the information that's being put out there, particularly by the state and central authorities. Like, why would you just take what they say as truth without actually checking the facts yourself?
What's very strange to me, and we can then maybe move this into the whole ETF BlackRock thing, is ever since I took more time in the Bitcoin ecosystem. So yes, I've gotten on board 10 years ago, but I just used it to pay for stuff. Like, I wasn't involved in all of these different concepts. And ever since I've been sort of, it sounds silly, but like politics, all of this dogfighting, it became all relative for me. Like, I didn't really care. The only thing I really cared about was getting my bills paid on time so that I can live a comfortable life. That's just number one. And then number two, it was sort of, okay, how can I help either the ecosystem, clients, projects, whatever, to reach their goals. And never in my mind, especially in the Bitcoin thing, was I thinking, hey, we need politicians A, B, and C, or we kind of need, even like the whole Saylor thing, right? When he came in, like I was always skeptical because I thought, well, Satoshi left because he realized he can move on. The project was stable, in quotation marks, enough back then. And maybe he's coming back, maybe not. I don't know. Maybe he died, whatever. They died. But it was sort of the perfect example of we don't actually need this. And we don't sort of need to put people up front where in 14 years Bitcoin has grown to be accepted or apparently spark interest by like Wall Street to build financial products with it, all without having really much people in the at the front who sort of dictating what's going on. And I think if I look at this and the potential that it has, if we now get everyone on board with better connectivity, simpler wallets, simpler ways of getting in, why do we then need to just focus on so much silliness? And I think you put out that tweet a few days ago, right? Like, why commit to the left, right, blue, red, up, down, whatever narrative if you just have Bitcoin and you can literally spend all day in it, like, and don't know what's going on the outside world. So like, that's what's most frustrating to me, to see and speak to fellow Bitcoiners who I know, like, they're not dumb. They know that we get baited 24/7 by like news headlines and all of these silly things, but yet they then still feel the need to be part of that discussion or to I don't know, put out the tweet, the buy Bitcoin or whatever thing. But I guess we've mentioned this a few times. It's just, this is probably something we'll never fix, and this is just a human aspect. Or maybe I'm not seeing through the things at play here that could indicate that something else is going to change or something big is coming. But yeah, it just feels weird that for a community that praises itself to think differently, we somehow still like to engage in these normal discussion points.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the motive behind my tweet that you mentioned was the fact that, look, there is the right and the left, this political spectrum that people can see and understand, and it's part of the state and the system that we've inherited. And I think once you understand the fundamentals of Bitcoin, you come into Bitcoin, you need to really rethink what that actually means, what is left, what is right, because it's the narratives of the state that you're adhering to or you're running with. And when you come into a new space that is Bitcoin, I think there's an opportunity there to have a different new conversation. And we've had discussions like this on the podcast where, there's people that I've had discussions with, and we both agree on Bitcoin, and we both show up to defend Bitcoin, despite our political differences. And I think as time progresses, there is an opportunity for us to redefine what politics look like in the future, and restructure it in a way, because the whole idea of Bitcoin in my mind is to separate money from state. So, when the state is not paying PR companies and all that sort of stuff to put out narratives for us to sort of digest, there's going to be a potential new way of thinking in the future. But that's just my pie in the sky thinking. The whole situation with, big whales coming into the space like Saylor and stuff like that, there's an ongoing conversation about whether Saylor buying all this Bitcoin is a good thing or a bad thing. Now you've got BlackRock coming in, trying to apply through the SEC for this spot ETF, and my understanding that's been rejected. And my understanding that it's been rejected because, and I've got something here about it, Bain, apparently the application was inadequate according to the SEC because it wasn't specific enough about how they'll manage a surveillance sharing agreement together. And that just screams to me that the SEC, the government, the central bank, the people in the power still want to see every transaction that's going on. And it just says it here with this surveillance sharing agreement. That just means Big Brother to me. They want to know what we're doing. and have some insight into the transactions we're making, and the SEC have rejected the application on that basis. So it makes me really sort of concerned about their motives really in the long term.
Yeah, and it just proves two things. One, the SEC doesn't understand Bitcoin, because tell me a more open and transparent ledger than on chain. Like, there is none. Yeah, okay, there's the pseudonymity and these things, but if you get the address, you can basically follow the money tracks. And secondly, you're right. It's about, can't remember the name of the book, but there's a great book about financial surveillance and what do they call it? Wall Street. They call it Wall Street capitalism because, and I think not many normies know this. If the central bank is giving Wall Street money, we never see or touch that money. So if central banks give commercial investment, special banks, these kind of money flows, this is not money that shows up in the regular economy like we have. The whole COVID credits and all of these things, those were exemptions. And even then, we now see years after that there was sort of the back dealing going on. And to me, the rejection just screamed, because the SEC, you've seen The Big Short, right? The movie with Steve Carell and all of these. Yeah, Steve Carell, I think. There was a girl who used to work for the SEC. She then moved to Goldman, I think, in a span of a few weeks, and basically she was then doing the job at Goldman, which she should have investigated with the SEC. And this is just how Wall Street works. If you want to get an advantage, you move different positions, different teams back and forth. And to me, this is what this Bitcoin spot ETF is. And then again, we have people in the Bitcoin community who go oh, it's a big deal, big money is moving in. Yeah, it was inevitable. If Bitcoin continued to track it did in the earlier parts, of course Wall Street is getting in, because all they see is dollar signs, right? Yeah. And a very cool return on their investment. So again, one of those weird things where I kind of sit there and go, really? Is that what we're all in it for? Or is that just one of those weird timing things again, where I think people are bored with the bear market?
Makes me question the motives of the people that are, like we were mentioning earlier, doing the selfies with politicians and all that kind of stuff, and almost encouraging the state adoption and the BlackRock and things like that as a money go up thing. What other than, they want mass adoption quickly so they can get to the moon. What other motivation would they have for, promoting these things?
Yeah, and even with the up to the moon thing, what I hate is if I read by 2030 Bitcoin is worth 1 million, and what is 1 million going to buy you then? Pint of milk?
Yeah, inflation, guys, come on.
Yeah, not even inflation. This is just basic economics. You can't price in an asset into the future with today's prices. This is just not realistic. Yeah. And at the same time, for it to be this much expanding and for the price to be that much by 2030, that'd be a hell of an performance. And just looking at past performances, every 4 years, roughly 18 months after a halving, the price drops again. We're sort of in a 1 to 2 year bear market, and then it picks up again with the next halving. So if all of these things happen, it kind of is like wishful thinking. And this is what's really bothering me. And this is why I spend less time commenting on these events and sort of writing about these things. I just more think about the things we can change, because there's literally so much more opportunity there with things like value for value, for example, different thought approach of getting reimbursed. I don't know, attaching information to your transactions to sort of send secret messages, whatever it is. These are very mundane examples, but that's much more exciting to me. Or having a opt-out if the state is coming in and trying to build backdoors into our encrypted messages. Literally impossible with the blockchain unless you go off-chain and you trust a third party and these things. So this is much more interesting than sort of arguing why Wall Street is coming for our coins. And having said that, to get it back to AML KYC, it takes so much work for these institutions to get assets in on their balance sheet. So it's not like BlackRock gets approved tomorrow with a spot ETF and then they just buy a gazillion of sats and basically, you know, hold the coins forever, because they go through such rigorous processes that this will also take time. So to me, it's just the best case example of we are definitely at the end of the bear market, because it's this crazy stuff is always happening then. And we should still focus on the fundamentals, which I think is something you said in Jordan's episode, instead of trying to find and fit to these current narratives.
Joël, you're absolutely right. You know, this is typical behaviour at the end of a bear market, and there's a lot of
How is that for you, by the way? Because it's your first one.
Yeah, it's my first real bear market, and you know, what I've actually done is look back over previous bear markets as well, because like we were saying earlier, that we need to trust and don't trust, verify. And you know, this is my first real bear market, and you know, I'm experiencing it firsthand, but I've also tried to look back over the other bear markets as well, and you know, look at old videos on YouTube and stuff like that, and it's quite clear that there's a lot of parallels between the sort of stuff that is out there at the moment and previous bear markets. And you know, I verified that by going back and looking at that data myself. But it's a little bit distracting. It's easy to be distracted, I think, and it's easy to get sucked into the sort of nonsense sometimes. But what I think it's really teaching me is true discipline in a way. And, you know, again, that's another thing that, you know, right on the back of Jordan's episode, which is the previous one to this video, what inspires me in this space is, you know, really it teaches you self-discipline and, you know, it's only improving me as a person overall, I think.
Yeah, 100%. And it really like at one point you get to that part in your Bitcoin journey, you go like, okay, now I've really seen it all, or I'm finally getting to like understanding the, let's call it, core principles, and then you just get thrown all over again and sort of have to start at the beginning, because there's always so much that creeps up. Long-term looking, I think it's very bullish that all of that stuff happened, because it does attract different people to Bitcoin. And to leave people with a bit of hope, I know we spoke about left, right, and all of these things. I believe, even though it happens to nutters like Nigel Farage or people like companies like BlackRock, come in, I bet a lot of people on the other side of the spectrum sit there and go, if the enemy, in their eyes, is looking at these things, maybe I should take a closer look as well. Maybe there is something there, because usually if you like have an enemy and they do something, you try to get on board as well, right? Or try to understand
enough curiosity for you to think, actually, what's going on here? Maybe I need a bit of this myself. Exactly.
Sure. And if this leads to more people with different opinions coming in, I am all up for it. It will make life a bit harder probably in the beginning, because we have to probably explain a lot of stuff over and over again. But, you know, hey, if that's what it takes, I'm down for it.
Yeah. And you know, it's all about repeating yourself again. I can't remember who it was we were speaking to. Wasn't it Freddie New? Yeah.
Yes, it was saying,
you just need to keep repeating yourself again and again and again and again. And that's just what you have to do. Because new people coming in all the time, you just have to go through the same motions all the time, every time. And I know, as the Bitcoiners, just to finish off this episode, because I know we're running out of time now, we complain a lot in Bitcoin space about the conferences and about the repeating of the same thing again and again and again. But I think there is an important side to doing that, is just repeating the fundamentals of Bitcoin. And if this is your first time watching our podcast, go back and listen to some of the stories of people, how they discovered Bitcoin and why they stayed, because it's fascinating to understand their journey. You can see a lot of parallels and a lot of difference in why people came into the Bitcoin ecosystem in the first place. And that is the true inspiration of what Bitcoin is the people that come into the space, whether you're left or right, up, down, blue, pink, yellow, whatever. You know, so, you know, look at Bitcoin, study Bitcoin, and, come down. We're all mad here. And if you like this episode, subscribe, like, and all that nonsense. And if you've got any comments to say in the comments below, fill your boots and let us know how you want to... What I was going to say there, Joël? I'm losing my train of thought. I'm rambling.
I mean, just basically leave us your opinion. If you have ideas, add them to the comments. We'll pick them up.
Good. Let's end it here, and we'll see you guys next time.